Welcome to the show No Instructions, where we meet with founders and interview them about starting and growing their businesses. I'm your host, Chad Ingram, 3-time founder and CEO at Distro. Distro is a platform to help businesses build teams by breaking down borders around the world. Let's go ahead and get started with today's guest and see how they built their business. Okay, welcome to the show No Instructions. Today we have Alex Lawrence with us from EV Auto and founder of EV Auto, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Thanks for being with us today.
Yeah, fun. Glad to be here.
Okay, cool. Before we dive into your story, just for a little context for listeners, tell me what is EV Auto? Yeah. Like just, Twitter style, kind of what is it that you guys do?
Yeah, we are a car dealership that sells exclusively electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids used. We sell all brands. We've got a physical location in Bountiful, Utah, one under construction in Lehi, Utah. We also offer mobile service as of this month. So we've got a Cybertruck and trailer that
I actually saw that on social media.
Yeah.
That's cool.
It's pretty cool. So we do sales and service, and we have, big plans beyond that, but that's the easiest way to describe it.
Have brands like Tesla created, because, most auto manufacturers will create a sort of system to have third-party groups support their vehicles, right? Like either manuals, service manuals, processes and stuff. Have the EV automakers like Tesla and others been very open about that, or have they been kind of difficult to sort of unveil services? So
they're open with, here's how stuff works. They're more open with you can get parts. I mean, Tesla's kind of famous. Back in the day, they wouldn't sell you parts even.
Interesting.
And so they were very controlling on that. There's nobody that'll let you do warranty work still. They want to keep that in-house, although I think that might change. They don't, send you business for non-warranty work, right? At least not yet. Yeah. But I'd say, like Tesla has a toolkit that you can plug in and you can pay for and pay an annual subscription and use, which is great.
But what about like tires and brakes and some stuff that is super applicable? Drivers still have to take care of all that stuff.
Yeah, and we do all that stuff, and that's not unique to those cars or vehicles. And so we do tires and brakes and things that are just everyday wear items that don't have anything to do with it being an EV.
Alignments, bushings, things like that.
Yep, all the above. Curb rash.
Yeah.
We fix that in their garage, and air conditioning compressors and all that stuff.
I'm a car guy, and I absolutely hate curb rash. You'll see me at my cars. You'll see my car parked, and I'm like parked way off of the curb. I'm like that weirdo.
Dude, that grinding sound, especially when it's like a Tesla Plaid that has $4,500 wheels on it, and you're at the drive-thru and you just hear. But for $125 in your driveway, we actually will grind it down and then repaint it. So a lot of places will just kind of touch it up that it looks good from far. Right. But we actually grind away the mistake and cover it. Yeah.
So that's cool. That's awesome. So that's part of this mobile service. So, okay, let's we'll come back to EV Auto a little bit later as part of clearly part of your story. But where does your story start? Like when somebody wants to get to know you, how do they get to know you? Like, where does your story start?
I think it starts, what's been formative in terms of who I am. I grew up a little differently than I think most people would guess. I think I fit at surface, and maybe even more so actually in my old age. I just turned 50.
You're not that old, but yeah.
50 sounds like a real number. 50 sounds like a real number to me, dude.
Yeah, right.
Like 40, no big deal.
It's
30, fine. It's like, whoa, 50. Is like I said, I may fit that mold more now, but I grew up in a lot of different physical locations. So I think we counted it up. It was like 16 different locations, addresses in 4 states by the time I was 15 years old.
Whoa.
And so, great parents that loved me. My dad was not in the military.
That's much more than a military brat sort of situation.
Yeah, it was a lot. It was a lot. I was the new kid all the time. So several places in California, a brief stop in New Mexico, several places in Colorado, but my parents were both from Utah. So we moved here like when I was 14 or so, and have been here ever since. So Utah is definitely home, but I grew up around a lot of different types of people. Always being the new kid, I kind of had to learn how to meet people and kind of introduce myself. And turns out that's great for sales and entrepreneurship and stuff like that. And had to, fight my way out of some spots and things like that.
Why did you move so much?
My dad was just trying to figure stuff out. He was entrepreneurial, but he also, he died a number of years ago, but was a really high IQ, really, really, really intelligent. And just kind of was he and my mom were just figuring stuff out. And like I said, they loved me. They were good to me. So it's not like I grew up in this scary environment. We just moved a lot as my dad was changing jobs and when we moved here, he started a company and finally found some level of success and stability. And that was, like I said, that was probably when I got around 16 years old or so.
Yeah. That's when life sort of started to normalize a little bit more.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I'm really lucky. I just, truly lucky. I just happened to connect with a few guys that ended up being really, really good guys. To this day, they're some of the best husbands, fathers, people that I've ever known in my life. And they were my three best friends. And so, truly just luck of the draw. And so, yeah, that combination of, staying in the same place for, from the time I was 16 until, I moved out of my parents' house at, I don't know, was I 20 or so? 21, I can't remember. I had this group of friends that really were just good, solid people that I got to hang out with that really made a difference.
And still friends with them to this day.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Two of them live further away and one of them lives close. And so we text on occasion and stuff. And so you kind of grow into, we don't see each other very often, but I know I could call any one of them and they could call me and in 2 minutes, I'd drop anything to go help them and the same thing in return for sure.
That's amazing. And what was it, as your dad was moving, was it more of job change or was it like him trying different businesses at the time? It
was both. Yeah. My dad did a lot of really interesting things. He was a unique guy. And I know we all have our own bias towards our fathers or mothers or parents or whatever, but he really was unique. His dad walked out when I believe my dad was 8 years old and they never heard from him again, ever.
Wow.
And so it was my grandma and my uncle who was 12 and my dad who was 8, and he left and they never heard from him again. They ended up finding out later, many years later, he went to California, had another family, but they never heard from him again.
This was your
ever.
Grandfather.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, and then his older brother, when my dad was like 12 or 13, he got married and left. And then his mom chased after some dude or something, went to New York. And my dad was left to live in the neighbor's basement alone when he was like 12 or 13. Wow. They didn't even really know the neighbors. She was just like, I'm going to New York. Can he stay with you?
Wow.
And so, and it was in Provo, Utah. So a divorced single mom, was a big deal in Provo, Utah in
wasn't
that
very common,
50s
right?
or whatever, very uncommon. And then he's left to take care of himself. And so, he had a very tough, situation there, but he made it out, had some challenges with alcoholism and other things. He quit before I was born, so I never experienced that. And that runs in our family pretty deeply. His dad was, my uncle was, there's a lot of addiction in my family. And so, he just kind of struggled to find his way, even though he was brilliant. He got a scholarship to BYU, scholarship to the University of Utah, easy peasy breeze through with degrees, and ended up working for a billionaire that they started a program for Black men to own their own service station. And this was in the 60s.
Wow.
And so my dad's got these pictures of him with these Black guys owning a service station, which was a huge deal as their own business.
Right.
I can't remember the billionaire philanthropist, but my dad was in charge of that program.
Wow.
And then he went to,
they're all over the state still. Sometimes you see some of these old abandoned style
that's what it
service
was.
stations.
Yeah.
They're really cool.
It was cool. And these black and white, but they were color pictures, but they had the little hats on, the little uniforms. My dad's there with these guys. And then he, either before then or after then, he started an alcohol, recovery program for some Native American tribes.
Really?
And alcoholism just runs rampant through the Native American community. And so he was like an honorary chief in 2 different tribes or something. So he really had this career of helping
And
people.
this was before he had even sort of settled down here and
Yeah, he was single and just really doing kind of big things, you know. Mm. And then he met my mom, and my dad was 30 and my mom was 18 when they got married.
Wow.
And so that wasn't the most popular thing around, you know. And then they moved to, I think, Washington, D.C. and Baltimore area, and he did some stuff there, and then back to California, and he ran a mental health hospital, and then Colorado. And that's, you know, I was born in California. And so when we moved back to Utah, my dad started a business called Lawrence Leadership. And this was in the 80s. Mm. And he taught leadership skills one-on-one to executives on a weekly basis. And so he just really thought the Stephen Covey stuff was great, but didn't have a lasting impact.
Right.
So the seminars, the books, the audio tapes.
Which was very big at the time. And he was in Utah at some point, you know, so he knew about that.
Yep. My dad would have made a killing if he was willing to do that. He just didn't think that was the way to help people become better leaders. So he had some really interesting clients. I know that he mentored Jerry Sloan for a little while. Governor Levitt was a client of his.
Wow.
Other big CEOs of companies and stuff. And he would meet with them once a week for like an hour. And he had this, I remember when I worked for him, he had this chart that had all these different categories of a leader. It was like charisma and intellectual ability and sense of humor and all these different things to rank somebody. And they would score themselves. They would have 5 of their closest reports score them, and then they would have their significant other score them. And he would have me put in all the scores and create these charts that you would like overlap.
Right.
And they would find like the universal ones where they scored low. And then they would just work on those. And then 6 months later, they'd rescore.
He was doing this
in the 80s on pen and paper, right? And so he has a book like this thick that I've thought about publishing, but he had a whole chapter on color. How does color affect leadership and the impacts that color has on an office and your thinking and your mood and all this stuff. And so one story, and we can move on, that sticks with me. There was a CEO who'd come up, ran a very large travel company, you know, $150 million, $200 million travel company. And he'd come up through the ranks through accounting. So he was a finance guy. Mm-hmm. And kind of the stereotype there, right? Became CEO of this company. And so he scored low in the sense of humor category. You know, that was one of the ones. And so my dad would write jokes for him and make him tell them to strangers in elevators. And so he'd say, hey, you're going to go tell these to people you don't know. You're going to be in the elevator. That was his weakness. And you're going to say, hey, you know, and he would make him do this accountant CEO. But over time, his sense of humor score, others started to think, because my dad believed that you needed to have some sort of sense of humor to be a great leader. So anyway, he did that for years, and then he got really sick and his business declined, and he was kind of forced into selling it, and then he died a few years later. And so it was a sad, but for a while there, he was really doing something really, really unique and special for sure.
So we'll come back to that. Describe your mom. What was your mom like?
Yeah, she's still alive. Yeah, she's full of energy. I mean, just full of energy. Just a really, you know, charismatic, outgoing, just a lot of fun. And so, and she was completely devoted to my dad, like completely, and took care of him for, I mean, gosh, he was pretty sick for a while. You know, she was there with him through his alcoholism and stuck with him. When I know a lot of people were like, get out of there, get out of there, get out of there. Mm-hmm. And my dad had a huge heart, just a really kind, loving person, but not problem free, right? That would have been a challenge.
Most people who are suffering and struggle with stuff like that are very caring.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of times I think people struggling with those sort of things are struggling out of like real trauma, right? Like some of the things you alluded to in your dad's story early on. I mean, it is no wonder, right, that he would be having some of the struggles that he had.
I mean, who was there to teach him otherwise, and how did he cope, and already had this hereditary, you know, predisposition.
Right.
And that's why I give him all the credit in the world for getting out of that.
Right.
And my brother's a happy, successful guy. I'm happy, reasonably, you know, I've had my challenges and stuff, but,
for sure.
But yeah. And, you know, like I said, my parents were good to me. They loved me, and my dad was great to me. They just were working through a lot of stuff, you know, and but yeah.
And now, when you were younger, were some of these struggles obvious to you, or are these things that became more realized later?
Yeah, no, I don't think no, I don't think so. One of the things that's interesting, So I got beat up a lot. I mean, I was mouthy and wouldn't back down and didn't have a lot of friends to have my back. And so I'm not kidding. I mean, I got beat up a lot to the point where, I mean, I'm sure I was concussed probably dozen times by the time I'd moved here. I mean, pretty serious stuff. I mean, these were some mean kids
you were the new
in
kid.
some rough areas. Yeah. I mean, they weren't like the ghetto, but I mean, there were times where I was definitely in the minority and the mouthy new kid.
You were new, right?
Yeah.
Like over and over again, right?
Yeah.
You probably didn't know any different.
And I was not afraid to talk to their girls and play on their sports teams, and you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the kind of the crazy thing is my memory is very, very poor from all those years. Like if you asked me where I lived when I was 7, I have no idea. It was in California, but I couldn't tell you what house or what address or what city, and I couldn't tell you who my friends were. I have no recollection of that at all. I really don't have hardly any recollection of anything, and I really sit there and try. It's frustrating. I'll be like, try to think. And it's not from trauma. I really think, I mean, I've had the scans and stuff. It really is a physical thing. I'm not like, I wasn't abused or something and I'm trying to like block that out. So I don't have a lot of, but I don't think that I felt like, I knew we moved a lot and it was hard. And as I got older, it got harder to move because friends mattered more the older you get. I don't have a ton of memory, but I don't think I was, oh wow, I've got it kind of weird or different or whatever. Because I was fed and clothed, and my parents were good to me, and we lived in safe, houses. Some of them were nicer than others, but So I don't want to over dramatize it. It wasn't like this, this super tough thing. It was just unique, which was the whole answer to the beginning question, right?
Right. I think. Like, and for many people, it's very unique, right? It's actually something I have a hard time too with that a lot of my childhood, like there's some things that are very clear that I remember and a lot that isn't. I'll like talk to my wife or friends and then they'll bring up a memory when they're like 3 years old or 4 years old. And I'm like, no way in hell am I remembering that, something like that. And, some of it's probably trauma-based and some of it's probably, I don't know. It's like everybody's story is like uniquely different, right? Yep. Some might be a little more challenging than others, but I think everyone, by the nature of humankind, is like life is not supposed to be easy, right? So it's just, you just have your story. So
and it had all that stuff has had a dramatic impact on all the other stuff we're going to talk about. My adult life. I mean, as is the case for everybody, right? Yeah. How your upbringing and childhood and young adulthood has a massive impact on your future.
When did your father pass?
Oh gosh, it's been a long time now. Let me think. Probably 17 years ago. Wow. So yeah, been a while.
So you would have been, you already gave us your age. So we're going to do some math. So you were what, 33?
Yeah, in my early 30s.
Yeah. So that's actually how old I was when my dad passed.
How'd your dad pass?
Years ago.
Mind me asking?
In a similar way to what you've already started to mention. So, lost their business, a lot of cortisol in his heart. His heart got bad from the stress, and he literally passed away from that. Wow. So super hard. So they kind of lost everything, moved him into my basement. So my mom passed when I was a baby, and so my stepmom and my dad moved into my basement to kind of sort of recover.
And difficult.
Yeah, definitely. So it was very traumatic for my dad. And, when all was said and done and we're looking at why he had a heart attack, it was like kind of obvious, right? The stress.
Yeah.
So kind of wild.
That is my dad. So they didn't lose, they lost a lot, but it was after he got sick. So he was doing well. And then his lungs went shot. He was wearing oxygen 24/7 for years, and it was actually put in through here. So it'd come down, he'd carry a bag, but then he got cancer. And so the oxygen thing was a decline of his ability to run a business, and then the cancer, and that's what pushed him over the edge.
How old was he?
Let's see. My dad was 67 when he died. Yeah. But the last 10 years of his life was pretty crappy.
Pretty rough.
But he had great attitude and fought really hard and really pushed to stick around, but it was tough for him. It got worse and worse every year.
Yeah, it's kind of wild. I mean, it's still young. 33 is still young to lose a parent.
Yeah,
it's definitely young.
It's hard.
How did you deal with that?
It was sad. Yeah, it was sad. It was hard to watch him decline because I honestly, I mean, again, we're biased. My dad was and is one of the most intelligent people I've ever met. He knew so much about so many things. I was interested in so many. I remember he'd sit down and be talking to me about quantum physics when I was like 14. And he'd been reading. He was a voracious reader. He'd read. I remember every night my dad was reading a book. Every night, 7 days a week, he was reading, and random stuff, totally different topics. He was just completely intrigued by all kinds of different things. And so he was just, it was sad. It was hard to watch his intellectual capacity decline and his physical capacity. He became weak and tired and stuff. And that was just not who I knew. And so, yeah, it was just really hard to watch that, you know.
Yeah, so. It is hard, you know. And you were young; he was young too.
Yeah, 67 is not old,
not at all,
and especially since his quality of life was crappy for a number of years before that.
Right. Know? So take another 10 years back; he was even younger, right? Like,
7 years older than me.
Yeah, that's wild. That's super wild.
Yep.
You look healthy though. You look great.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I lost 75 pounds about 10 years ago.
Did you really?
Mm-hmm. And I was very unhealthy for a long time because all I did was work. And so, you know, daily strenuous exercise is something I push everybody I know to do. And the key is daily and strenuous because there's a lot of great things about going on a walk and stuff like that. But, you know, it's been a life changer for me and is definitely a part of my identity now in the sense that, you know, if I don't do it, I feel off. And so, yeah, that's been a big change. A little over 10 years ago.
That's awesome. All right. So you graduate school at some point, you graduate high school. Yeah. What do you do after that?
I didn't know what to do. You know, I never wanted to be a lawyer or a fireman or a professional athlete, fill in the blank. And most everybody I knew wanted to be a something.
Yeah.
I knew I didn't want to go into my dad's business. It was interesting to me, but I just didn't want to do that. And so what I've come to find out is I wanted to be an entrepreneur and just didn't know it. You know, it's interesting. My first real business that I ever started was a car detailing business when I turned 16. And I made a flyer and I would go around on the East Bench of Bountiful to all the rich houses and I would just go door to door and see if they wanted me to detail their car. I had no fear. And so I ended up making more money than any of my friends because they were just making $5 an hour, right? And I was cleaning cars. And I read some research not too long ago that said the things you're most interested in between the ages of 13 and 18 are the things that would translate to the most professional success if you could do it. And I thought, first business, car detailing business. Last business I'm ever going to do, car business.
Yeah.
So I thought my car was everything to me back then. And so I just think it's funny because I've never done anything with cars in between, you know, over that 34-year period.
Would you describe yourself like just in your adult life, or were you interested in cars, like from a, you know, car person perspective, you know?
Not like you.
Yeah.
And not like Ethan and some of those guys.
Yeah.
I just like cool cars.
Yeah.
I don't know how they work. I can't fix them. I don't want to know. That doesn't interest me. I'm not aficionado in that, like, oh, I want to drive a stick shift Porsche 911, right? I'm just like, that Porsche is cool. I want to drive it.
You enjoyed it.
I love cars. So fun. Just pure fun, though. They give me joy.
Right.
And so that was the first kind of thing. So when I graduated from high school, I was like, well, my dad went to the U, my uncle went to the U, you know, I'll go to the University of Utah.
Okay.
Got into business school there. C student.
At the time though, like let's say when you're, you know, 18, 19, 20, at the time, did you feel like you knew you wanted to be an entrepreneur? You just didn't know what you wanted to do yet. Did that sort of, were you able to at least identify that at the time or not quite?
No, entrepreneurship was not a thing back then. And it definitely wasn't cool.
Yeah.
I mean, boy, has that changed. And so, but I should say, so my three best friends and every friend I had went on a mission for the LDS church.
Okay.
And I got baptized in the LDS church when I moved here. My parents were LDS and I got baptized when I was 16, but I was like, I'm not leaving for 2 years to go on a mission. That's never been my plan.
Yeah.
And so it was just not a thing. My three best friends, their moms were or became single mothers before or during their mission. So I ended up having a real special relationship with their moms and just kind of checking in on them, kind of taking care of them and that stuff. But yeah, I was alone again. Every friend I had left. Yeah. And so I went up to the U, had a mediocre experience. I was like, yeah, it was kind of fun, but you're in stadium seating with a teacher's assistant doing the class and nothing. I just didn't get my education. I didn't feel like was very good. And so I was dating a girl. I mean, I went on a couple dates with a girl that was down in Utah County. I went down to see her. She took me to this place called Zucca Juice. Probably too young to remember that, or do you remember that?
So I know Zucca Juice because I was friends with Brad Davis.
Oh yeah, I'm still friends with Brad Davis.
Yes,
Roxbury.
Yes, and so I don't actually remember the brand, but I think I moved to Utah the first time shortly after Zucca Juice had been sold
to Jamba.
Yeah. And so, but I only knew about that from Brad because Brad and I were part of the same business networking group and years ago. And he was really kind to me when I was just kind of a young, dumb entrepreneur.
Brad's great. And he and I still talk, his brother, I think his brother bought a car for me. But anyways,
he's up north too, I thought too.
Yeah. I don't know where he's located. We just communicate digitally. I haven't seen Brad in years.
Yeah.
She took me to this place. There were lines out the door. I went back with her the next day or two. We went again. There were lines out the door. The thing that people don't understand, smoothies were not a food item then. They weren't on menus. They didn't sell smoothie blenders in stores.
Right.
They were like, it was like this brand new thing that California invented. The only people that had them were bodybuilders, that made protein shakes. And so it was this totally new food category, and it was just wildly successful. Right. And so I tracked down the founder and said, I want to own some franchises. I'd never owned a franchise. I didn't have any money. And he said, great, put together a proposal for that. And so I went to my friend's dad, who was the richest guy I knew. He was a banker and he was very intimidating, man of few words, but he was the richest guy I knew. And I said, hey, we should open these Zucca Juice franchises. You pay for them and I'll run them. And so I took him down to Provo to their first location, and he was like, oh yeah.
And was Zucca as a concept pretty new at the time?
Yeah, I think they had like it's a tough for me to remember, but I think they had 3 locations, 4 locations, not a lot.
Yeah.
So we put together this proposal, my first business plan, all that stuff, met with them, all that stuff. I think they called us back a few weeks later and said, gosh, we love you guys. They really liked Fred, right? Because they got his personal financials. They're like, hey, this guy
is great.
Yeah. And but they said, but we're not going to franchise Utah. We're going to keep those as corporate stores. And that was my first experience where I had done a ton of work and it didn't work out and I was gutted, and really good learning experience. The founder called me back however many days later and said, hey, what are you doing? And I was doing stupid little entrepreneurial things.
How old were you at the time?
Early 20s.
Okay.
Yeah, 22 or something.
Sure.
I don't know. And he said, well, come work with me. Essentially be my right-hand man. Well, it didn't offer me that, but I did anything, everything. I said yes to anything. I literally would do dry cleaning, car washes, but I was also selecting franchise locations and negotiating leases and helping with franchise.
At 22,
anything.
Right? Like
yeah, very early 20s.
Huge.
Yep, I'd do anything. And they started building teams of experts. They brought in a Harvard guy, and Brad's an attorney and all this stuff. Right. And I worked my way into some sweat equity in a franchise in Idaho. And I'll tell you 2 stories there that are meaningful in my background. One, the franchisee up there couldn't find a location. He'd had the franchise rights. And so he called me and said, hey, do you mind driving up to Idaho and helping me? I've had all these real estate agents, can't find a location. And this concept I'm still doing it to this day, and it still worked for my current location and my second location.
Wait, what do you mean?
I will tell you the concept, what it is. It's just crazy. At 50 years old, it's still working what I did. And nobody taught me this. I don't know how. I think it's my upbringing, okay?
Yeah, okay.
So I said, I found what's the busiest intersection in Pocatello, Idaho? And it was very clearly, it was Main and Main, right? Pocatello Avenue, and Starbucks is on this corner, the movie theater's on that corner.
Right.
And of course, there's no vacancy signs, right? Anybody can drive around and look at vacancy signs and for rent. What's the big deal about that? So I just went around and knocked on every door in that 2-block area on all 4 corners and just asked them if they'd move, if they wanted to move out. And I finally, I found one. This paint store, I can't remember if they wanted to retire or whatever. And we ended up getting on the busiest corner, a location that everybody's like, how in the hell did you get that spot? And so anyway, he offered me some ownership in that, and I earned some ownership in that, and I royally screwed that up because I was trying to serve two masters. I would work for the corporate company during the week. I'd fly to San Antonio. I ended up being the person that picked and negotiated the franchise locations. So that ended up being what I was responsible for. And so I would be like in San Antonio for 2 days and then in Dallas for 2 days. And then I'd come home, I'd get my suitcase, I'd drive to Idaho, I'd work in the stores, I'd come back.
You would actually go to the store
and
work the
all
counter.
Weekend. Yep.
Wow.
And then come back Monday morning and get on another plane. And I did that for years.
Were you married at the time yet?
And I had no life.
Still single dude.
I didn't get married till I was 27 or 20.
Okay.
In Utah, years,
and at the
old.
time, that is like, even
old.
At the time, right? Everyone got married at 21,
all my friends were married.
22.
All my friends got married. Yeah, some of my kids by the time I got married.
Yeah, that's
so
weird.
So all I did was work, and I was trying to serve two masters, and I ended up dating my manager. And part of it was just desperation. I had no social life, and that ended up going south, and I ended up essentially getting kicked out because I mean, truly, I deserved it, right?
Yeah.
But it was a great learning for me.
Yeah.
But what I learned in that business, I've seen the founder a few. I'm forever grateful for the entire experience, good and bad.
Yeah.
I learned so much. I truly believe that experience, I think I probably learned more in those however many years it was than my bachelor's degree, my MBA, and my PhD combined.
Why?
In terms of, dude, there's just nothing like being that young and being just thrown in the deep end for all these things that were wildly successful.
Where was your manual on how to negotiate a lease?
Right?
Where was your manual on choosing a location?
Dude, there wasn't. Now, I had some mentors. So Rich Robbins and Steve Bowler were the two biggest commercial guys, and they were ours, and they taught me so much. But some of it was just.
But that's part of it, though. That like you can't just sit around and experiment. Like, part of doing it the right way is to go learn from somebody, right?
Absolutely.
If you can, you know?
And they taught me a ton.
Yeah, it's huge, right? So like, I mean, it goes so much into like people hiring new companies, startups, growing companies. Like, are you looking for people with the right pedigree or the right DNA? You know, people that are willing to go ask the right questions. You know, people that say, I don't know how to do that, but I'm going to go freaking find out.
Yep.
You know?
DNA can turn into pedigree.
Sure.
You know, and so totally. DNA every time. Every time.
I did have an executive coach while I was running my last startup, and he told me to be careful. So I started stacking my team with these really high pedigree people, right? And I was really excited. You know, I was young. I was
you
like
can finally
29.
afford them and attract them and all this stuff.
And I'm paying them double what I'm making, right?
Yep.
You know, and this coach, I'm all excited to tell him, look who I recruited. You know, and he goes, be careful. First thing he said, I said, why? And he goes, because when you hire experienced people, they do what they did.
Yeah, truthfully.
And he's like, it doesn't mean it'll work for you. Yep. So just be mindful of that. So anyway, but yeah, you were young and learning, you know? Yeah. So then what ended up happening next? Where'd you go next?
Yeah. So I was like, hey, food franchises, that went really well. I mean, Suzuka was the crumble of the day. You know what I mean? Like, they sold the Jamba Juice. Oh man, there were hundreds in the pipeline. Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
And some really interesting stuff. I remember that the founder and I, we would go to California and we would go to a bunch of Jamba Juices secretly and look at all their new designs and then come back and he'd be like, we should paint that wall purple because we just seen a bunch of purple walls. Yep. I mean, it was a dead knockoff. Square footage, menu, colors, even the name. And that was strategic. We got all the things east of Jamba. Mm-hmm. If you know real estate, you can tie up shopping centers with exclusive use provisions. Mm-hmm. And so it was like, if Jamba is going to go east, they're going to have to take all the B- locations because we've got all the A locations locked up. We've got the pick your mall, right? We're there.
Interesting. So there's huge advantage. There's two things there. There's like huge advantages to being second to market, right? So you don't have to be the first to be the dominator. Like becoming second to market allows you to
we were first in this market and nobody had even heard of them yet.
No, that's true. I guess that is true. Yeah. So you might have been one of the early big acquisitions.
And that's where Dave has gone on to found Rumby Island Grill and now Zao.
Sure. Yep.
And so he is a restaurant concept genius.
Yeah. So, I didn't realize he was doing Zao.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm sure he'll do something after that.
Yeah, for sure. Yep. And you know, Brad's doing some other stuff too.
Roxbury.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Smoothies.
But he also owns like a ton of other brands as
Doesn't
well.
surprise me.
So franchises and stuff.
Yep.
And I think he has like the regional rights for managing all of the Subway locations in this region or something like that.
Doesn't surprise me at all.
It's wild.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me at all.
There's a lot of ways to make money out there, right?
But one of my favorite sayings, not all profits are created equal.
Yeah, that's
and
true.
So I've learned that from a friend of mine, and that's part of why I've gotten out of certain businesses, franchising being one of them.
Yeah.
I mean, it is a brutal way to make money, but there is no better way to learn how to operate a business because you have to do everything, especially before you have scale. I tell people all the time, if you're going to own one franchise, own 5.
Yeah.
I don't get into it for one.
You can't just do one.
You can if you just want a job.
Yeah.
If you just want a job, you go to the same place every day, all day, and just run a restaurant. If that's your dream, then own one.
Yeah.
So, but it probably shouldn't even be a franchise if you're going to do that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And additionally, like what they were doing is building a business that could be acquired by them at some point.
That's right.
Like,
well, it was meant to be acquired by Jamba. Right. It was like, we're either going to be the best competitor in America, or they're going to decide they want to move east and they have to buy us. And that's what happened. Yeah.
That is interesting. So, tell me about the time you do eventually get married. So, I mean, you're in your 20s. At some point, you kind of come out of this phase of life where you're working a ton, which is great because you're getting paid to go to school essentially, right? Like the real entrepreneur school.
And for my age, it was good money.
Yeah.
I bought my first house and moved out and my early 20s, and stuff. And so, I stayed with franchising for about a decade and got married during that period of time. My wife was the first person I'd ever loved. I'd never been in love before. I'd never been engaged, or I never actually had a serious girlfriend for my wife. Just no tolerance for long-term anything. And it's just not in my focus. Wasn't what I wanted to do. So, but I met her the same way, this theme, right? I saw her in St. George. We were both down there for different things. And I saw the car she came up in, but I couldn't find her. So I wrote a note and found her car and put it on the car and just said, hey, I saw you. I think you saw me. Here's my phone number. I'd love to meet you. And so just again, who cares, right? My friends would make fun of me like, dude, what are you doing? And the best part about it, the funniest part is her friend called. There were 2 of them in the car. Her friend called me and I was talking to her friend on the phone. She's like, yeah, come over, we'd love to meet. And I get there and her friend had gotten all ready, and she answers the door and I'm like, wait a minute, you're not her, So we go around the corner and my wife is in like pajamas and a t-shirt watching TV. And
she thought it was the wrong person.
The friend thought I was leaving the note for her, right? How would you know, right? And so I was like, and then we both knew like, oh, wait a minute, the note was for me and for her. And so the next day I was like, hey, can we just hang out? Like,
did you tell her right away, or did you take her on a date?
The next day I was like, hey, just so you know, that note was for you. And she's like, I hoped it was, And so, so we dated and got engaged in under a year or so, I think, and have been married almost 25 years.
Wow. Awesome.
Yep.
And I don't know, what did she think marrying kind of a crazy future entrepreneur?
Yeah, I mean, her family life was very different than mine. She's born and raised in Ogden. Her dad was a dentist for 40 years. Very stable, very normal, not without any difficulty, but, and I've never resented her for that or anything like that. Just a different thing. And she actually had been married before. It's so funny. I asked her, have you ever been in, one time I had asked her if she'd ever been in love before, and she said, yeah. And I said, have you ever been engaged? And she said, yeah. But we didn't go past that, right? Because I didn't think to say, have you ever been married? And then she wasn't, but later she said, hey, and she got married when she was 18.
Yeah.
And I think they were married for like 5 years, but never really happy. Didn't have any kids.
Never had kids,
yeah. And they're not they're not enemies. Things amicable, just didn't work out. She was 18.
Yeah.
And so she'd been divorced for several years when I met her. And she's been through a lot though. Holy cow, she's been through a lot. I mean, I put her through the ringer. And really, the sad thing is it took me until about 5 years ago to kind of figure things out.
Yeah.
And I think she was at the edge 5 years ago, right at the edge. And quite frankly, nobody would have blamed her, and I wouldn't have blamed her, but she, stuck around, and the last 5 years have been really good.
She's a trooper.
Man, she's as good as they get.
How many kids do you guys have?
We have two daughters, both adopted.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Cool.
One was born in Texas. The other was born in Ogden. 19 and 13, 19-year-olds in college back in Washington, D.C.
How old were they when you adopted them?
At birth.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And great stories there, but yeah, they're awesome. So we've just got our little family of 4.
That's awesome. Good for you guys.
Yep.
Kids it's amazing. It's just like an amazing experience. Like just, I don't know. It took us a while to have kids. We're abnormal, I would say, we're more normal to the rest of the world probably, but we're abnormal to Utah. Like we didn't have kids till, I don't know, I think I was 32 maybe when we had our first.
Yeah, it was like 31.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
A little bit different than, you know, and me and my wife got to spend a lot of time just with each other, right? We weren't sure if we'd have kids. And so it was like, you know, but incredible experience, you know, having them. But
how many do you have?
3 children.
3 children.
Yeah, I've got a 5-year-old son, a 4-year-old girl, and a 1-year-old girl.
Okay, so you're still in your 30s then.
Oh yeah, yeah. And it's like it's busy.
Yeah,
it takes every bit out of you.
I mean, and I'll tell you, little kids, little problems, big kids, big problems. It's a different thing parenting older kids. And you know, my kids, I was a very mediocre father.
Yeah.
I mean, they suffered too through my challenges and stuff. And
why do you think that was?
You know, growing up in the environment that I did, again, checking that with not the ghetto and some horrible, but just my insecurities from that just drove me, and still do to this day, drive me to just want to succeed so bad in such an unhealthy way that all I cared about was working and myself. And so, I mean, I worked 100 hours a week for probably 20 years. Yeah. I had no hobbies. You know, I didn't have a girlfriend until my wife. I was a very absent husband and father. And I came to find out that that was a safe place for me to hide from, you know, the challenges of being a husband and father, or the challenges of facing some of my past decisions and things like that. I would just work, because work was a positive thing I was doing.
Was work avoidance, or was work more of something that you got something from?
Both.
Okay.
Yeah, both. And so, and today, being in a healthier spot, it's not avoidance, it's enjoyment, but it's still hard for me with the insecurity side to not want to work all the time, to try and prove that I can, you know, do something and be something and achieve something, which is kind of sad, but it is the way it is. You know, it's just kind of part of how I'm wired.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to put that, because it's definitely not an excuse. And I feel I've definitely felt this in for me, I feel like it ebbs and flows. Yep. I kind of go into these cycles of the same thing. Right now I'm like working a lot, and trying to do it better now. But when I was running my last VC backed startup, it was just like, it was a freaking freight train. And, you know, we raised money, I hired a bunch of people, selling a ton. Like it was like freaking Viagra pill, just it's
invigorating, right? Yeah, it's very fun.
You could do, right? And, but what's wild is that we didn't have kids yet. And so there wasn't like a lot of reasons to go home with my wife. And my wife is actually really cool and passive, right? Yeah. So she won't complain to me or whatever. She'll just kind of take it. And so I'd have to be really careful and mindful of like stepping back. Yep. And, cause you know, before you know it, you can find yourself in kind of like a really negative spot, right?
Oh yeah, and, for sure.
And
I was.
And that's kind of what happened. So it's really, that is tough. So what ended up being kind of your, like, what did you end up doing after, you know, getting married, having kids, you know, adopting children? Like, what was your next step?
So, you know, I did franchising for about a decade, got an MBA during that period of time. I was the only self-employed person in my program. I just have some of that
actively working in the market as opposed to studying.
Yes. Right? Yeah. Well, people worked for companies that were paying for them to get an MBA.
Right.
And so, you know, that side of my dad had rubbed off. I was just curious. I just wanted to learn. And I had an incredible experience that time. And that was at Weber State, which ended up coming full circle to me being a professor there today. So I did that. And then there was a pretty key moment. Some friends of mine from the East Coast had talked to me about bringing a food franchise from the East Coast out to here called Five Guys Burgers and Fries.
I didn't know you were involved.
I wasn't. This is the key turning point. And so I went out there with my wife and kids and my mom and ate burgers like nonstop for 3 days. I came back and I said, you guys should do this. You're going to crush it. I agree. Let me introduce you to somebody I think could do great. And I said, I'm not doing foods franchises anymore. I'm going to go into the tech industry because that's what I really am interested in. I've always been an early adopter. I've always, you know, signed up for the latest gadgets and software and websites and stuff. And so that was a very conscious decision to go down a different career path.
Now, I remember this time frame because this is about the time that I came to Utah. I remember when when Five Guys had just opened up in Utah, and it was kind of like all the buzz at the time.
They ended up opening hundreds of locations. Right. I mean, I would have been fabulously wealthy from that, but I've never once regretted it. Every time I see one or go into one, I just smile.
And who knows, right? Like, who knows? That could have been great for you. That could have not. I've
never second guessed it. I've always been happy with that decision and happy for my friends and the friend I introduced that have done very well.
So what was your experience in getting into tech? Like, so you made this decision, hey, I'm going to not do this. I'm going to get some clarity here and do this.
Started building little websites for small businesses, built one of the very first third-party apps for Twitter. I think I was user like 16,000 on Twitter or something like that, and just started going down that road. And then eventually got into what is now called Lendio with Brock and those guys. It was called Fund the Universe back in the day. Yeah, I was there for a number of years. We launched Lendio together. That was a product and a brand that Lendio's I was
massive now.
In the trenches. Yeah, and I talked to Brock yesterday or the day before. Dude. He's a great dude. We're lifelong friendships at all these places.
We need to have him on this podcast.
He'd be great. Hey, that guy, I mean, talk about a 15-year overnight success. That is the ultimate grind. He's been running that business for 15 years. Yep. And they still haven't had an exit or a liquidity event and that I know of. They will.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that's the story behind that. That dude deserves every outcome they ever get. And so does Trent, his co-founder, and some of the others that have been there for almost as long. And I don't know if I'd still be there, but Weber State called me while I was there. I thought they were going to ask for like a donation or something. Seriously, the president and the provost, and they asked me if I wanted to come start an entrepreneurship program. And that was a moment where I felt like, hey, I should maybe get off the treadmill for a minute and go do this. And so I did that for a few years and got to teach a class or two. And I did, I started an entrepreneurship program at Weber State. I started a technology commercialization office there, which they didn't have to commercialize professors' inventions. Mm-hmm. I built Weber State downtown, which is a cool building for startups. And I led that. There were a whole bunch of people that did it, right? And did some things that I think are going to be around forever.
Tell me about your decision of like leaving sort of the private, tech community and Lendio, even a while ago was still fun and sexy, Dude, even if it was smaller,
the year before, we were number 34 on the Inc. 500 nationally in all categories and number 1 in Utah, all categories, fastest growing privately held. So it was not an obvious time to leave at all.
Right.
And so, but it wasn't quick. It took me a couple of weeks of thinking about it and praying about it and talking with my wife and friends. And again, it was the right decision. Mm-hmm. I did the bureaucratic job. I was actually the vice provost. So I had an office on the top floor, kitty corner from the president, resented by academics all over that this, and it was so fun though, until I was like, I need to get back into the startup and I love teaching. And so you're doing these programs, you're doing these projects for the university. It's probably fun. It's very entrepreneurial. You're creating something from nothing. And creating it that, like I said, I think those 3 things that I mentioned, I think will be around forever.
Yeah.
And that's pretty fun. I think those 3 things will, the entrepreneurship program and startup Ogden, Weber State Downtown, and the technology commercialization office at Weber, which are all 3 very entrepreneurial things, I think will be there forever. And so that's pretty fun.
So you're still teaching today?
Yeah.
What class are you teaching?
I teach sales technology, which is Salesforce and LinkedIn and AI tools and all that stuff. And then I teach sales proposals, pitches, presentations, that kind of stuff.
I love that because it's like actually applicable.
Dude, did you know there's a 4-year bachelor's degree in sales at Weber State?
I actually think
oldest program in the country.
Like last year, that was the first time I'd ever heard of that. And I was like,
degree.
It's insane. Like I love that because it's not like, I don't know. I can be critical of kind of the education space because it's very slow, right?
Yeah,
by the time something gets syndicated and chosen to be put in a textbook and then published and then anyway, it's just kind of inherently slow, right? Because a lot of these things you kind of, all right, take out whatever tools and mediums you want to use. The concepts are really the same, right?
Yep. And then they're learning stuff today they can use tomorrow. I mean, they're learning personality profiles and sales forecasting and how to use Salesforce and how to do a pitch and a proposal and presentation and all these things around sales that are very applicable. And so our students come out of that program, they get good jobs. It's a very affordable program. They come out with little to no debt. And so there's very few programs I would even consider teaching in.
I imagine that there's quite a few inherent entrepreneurs that kind of find themselves in that course as well, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
Yep.
That's very cool. So hopefully you keep doing that and have influence on that, because that's very cool.
It's a little side thing. I got a PhD at Oklahoma State during that time.
Right.
Again, kind of the insecure chip on my shoulder. The academics wouldn't really accept me. And so I'm like, okay, fine. I'll do that. Yeah. And not just, I didn't do like University of Phoenix, no offense. I went to a really hard school and I commuted to Oklahoma every month for years to attend class. But I got my PhD, I got awarded tenure last year. So I actually
a tenure. So how that works, that tenure at USU, right?
Yeah, at Weber State.
Sorry,
Weber State. No, yeah. So I can teach there for as long as I'd like, assuming that I continue to do a good job.
Wow.
So and it is a challenge though. It's hard. It's hard to teach and run a business.
But what is cool though is like, however the life cycle of EV auto goes, which I want to talk about next with the time we got left. You still can, like, you could sunset, sell whatever EV auto as a business, and you could continue to teach for a long time.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And still have a lot of influence.
Yep.
Another 20 years,
so.
So that's really cool.
Yeah,
okay. So tell us how you get to the idea of EV auto. Like, why?
Yeah.
How does this arrive at your brain that there's maybe a problem you need to solve here?
So EV Auto actually was born out of evcars.com, which was actually not my idea. So my co-founder, Logan, I'll never forget, I was walking up and down my driveway. We were talking about different ideas and stuff. And he said, you know what? There's no good website to buy or sell a used Tesla. And we were both tech guys and Tesla guys. And I said, that is true. And so we started down the road of, we went out and purchased evcars.com, which was not super cheap. But to this day, I think it's still one of the best domains out there. And with the plan of building a marketplace like KSL, but only for EVs, where private sellers could list, dealers could sell their inventory. And so we were going down that road, and every business I had been involved in, I had either been the customer or had been very close to the customer. And with dealers being our paying customer, I'd never been a car dealer. I'd never worked with car dealers. So this same co-founder had a dealer's license for like 25 years.
Seriously.
That just was kind of off to the side.
Yeah. They're kind of hard to get.
They are.
And there's requirements and stuff.
Yeah, you can't just go get one and not pay sales tax. People don't realize.
Sure. So you have to have like space requirements, parking requirements, all that.
And so we met all that through and dusted it off.
Cool.
And I bought a car at the auction, not with the intention of being a car dealer, just to see what kind of software they use and their vocabulary. And so I could at least speak to them. Mm-hmm. And so I did that for almost a year and a half. I'd buy one, sell one, buy one, sell one. Then I bought two and sold two while we're building the marketplace. In the marketplace, we were getting adoption. It was going, and it hit me about a year and a half into it. This was we started 5 years ago in December, EV cars. I'm like, wait a minute, maybe the opportunity is a car dealership for EVs, not a marketplace.
Because nobody's like really doing that. There might be a couple somewhere, but like that is not a common thing.
Nope. And so it was like, okay, let's buy 4 cars. Let's buy 6 cars. Let's buy 8 cars. Let's lease a location. And right as I was getting ready, or as we were getting ready to lease a location, it was like, you know what? We're gonna park EV cars. Mm-hmm. And both of us, Logan's had wild success. I've had some degrees of success. Both of us are big thinkers though. It's like, well, if we're going to do this, we're going to do it. And so our agreed upon, publicly stated then and now was to build a chain of dealerships. So we would be the largest seller of used electric vehicles in the world. And that is the goal from day one to today and forevermore. And so, and that means Europe. That means, but everything we're doing is to try and build something.
Well, what's interesting about that is that, like, even though the cars are not like inherently different, they drive, they brake, they accelerate, they, need to be washed, tires changed, all their cars, right?
Yep.
But for some reason, I feel like regular traditional dealerships definitely do not gravitate to EVs. And so there's this like underserved market kind of, and if you are set out to go buy, let's say, a Tesla, you're kind of left to just go do that yourself. And there's a lot of people that aren't very familiar with how to just go buy a car and finance it yourself through your own bank. And that's kind of a pain in the butt for a lot of people. Yep. So having a dealer sort of service attached to options, like it, I don't know, it feels like that probably was an underserved market. It still is.
Yeah. And it's a bumpy road. I mean, so EVs are the most volatile vehicle in terms of valuation. A year or two ago, the EV market as a whole had the largest single year of depreciation of any car in history. And so values went.
By what percentage would you say?
Oh man, it was
15%.
Yeah, it was
20%?
strong double digits.
Yeah,
I mean,
okay.
people were losing tens of thousands of dollars in value on their cars in 6 months. Yeah. So it was a bloodbath.
But they're not like cut in half.
Some of them were.
Really?
Oh man. I mean, I'll give you an example. I think I owned the first Model S Plaid in Utah.
Okay.
We bought it to keep it as a company car. Yeah. So actually that's not true. We bought it and just fell in love with it so much that we decided to keep it, but then the values plummeted it so hard, we decided to keep it. Okay. But we paid $151,000 for that car. It's a 2021. It's got 30,000 miles on it.
Right.
I could buy that same exact car right now for probably under $50,000.
Really?
Yeah, right around there.
That is pretty low.
So $100,000 in lost value in 3 years.
So big swing.
Yeah, big swing. So, and certain cars lost more than others, but the premise remained the same. And then if we were going to do that, we need to build a brand. We need to build an experience, something that merits national expansion. And that really transitions over to, the bar for a great car buying experience is pretty low. And so I felt like it was possible for us to do. Yeah, I mean, have you had a lot of great experiences buying a car?
Old school, it's slow, hour with the finance manager for no reason.
High pressure.
Yeah, a
lot of times they don't know a ton about the car. There's just all these negative things that most people associate with buying a car. It's the second largest purchase in their life behind their house. And they're buying a new car. It should be fun.
And some people do it a lot, and it's kind of a bad experience.
Over and over.
Yeah.
I mean, they'll get a salesperson they like, but even still, at the very least, it takes way too long. And you've got to work with too many people, and you still get pressured to buy things that you may or may not be interested in. And so the first thing is to just change that. And to just make it a completely pleasant experience you work with one person. We can get you in and out of here as fast as you want. We're not going to pressure you. We know everything about the cars. It's a fun environment. It's low key. It's chill. I mean, just stuff that has turned out that we're now the highest rated car dealership in Utah on Google of any dealer, new or used. Cool. We're a perfect 5.0. We're the only perfect 5.0.
That's awesome.
And so that experience, but now it's gone beyond that to we really want to make it the best buying experience you ever had, car or not. So delivery, pickup, white glove, surprise and delight, extra things to do to just make it so that they're looking for an excuse to refer somebody to us. Their listening ears like, oh, you're going to buy a car? I got somebody I got a guy, right? Yeah. And so that's been our North Star. And so far it's been really good.
That's fantastic. So I drive your Lehigh location's, I don't know, maybe 1.5 miles from my house, and I drive by it pretty consistently on the way to work every day. And so that's exciting. You opened up that recently, right? Yeah.
Well, it's just a little temporary location. Yeah. The couple acres to the north will be a brand new building, a massive sign on I-15.
You're doing a full build out.
Oh yeah, it won't be open until March. It's a brand new. If you get to the north corner there's a big thing. You can see a picture of it.
Got it.
And so big showroom, bunch more cars, a 4-bay dedicated service bay, a massive sign that hangs over onto I-15. I mean, we're going for it. It's all chips in the middle. And then we're working on some other locations in Utah as well.
That's really awesome. Yeah. Well, congratulations on the success. Thanks, for sure, given that you sell a consumer product service, right? Like, if you're looking for an EV car used, definitely go to EV Auto. You can Google it. You'll find them easily.
Yep, you will. Yeah, I'd love to help.
Yeah. And if anyone has any questions for you, like as an individual, where can they get in touch with you? Yeah,
it's just Alex at EV Auto. But I also am very active on LinkedIn and TikTok and Instagram and stuff. So DMs on those are great. I'm in the dealership every day and we'll be in Lehigh every day when it opens. So very accessible.
It's awesome.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, dude.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on the show.
Okay.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of No Instructions. Feel free to leave us a rating or review wherever you listen to podcasts and subscribe so we can continue producing these podcasts. Today's episode was brought to you by Distro. Distro is a platform to help startups find, hire, and pay employees in over 200 countries. It's free to use. Go to distro.io to set up your free account today.